I'm totally gonna have to post that horrifying drawing of mine with no context. I'm like, yeah.
Can you guess
like,
what we talked about this week?
Can you guess what Cassie was ranting about? Hello and welcome to another zany episode of Nerdy West Coast Swing, the podcast with pixels where the anchors are out of this world and the points don't matter. We're here to help train your eyes so you can learn faster and dance better. I'm Cassie Winter.
I'm Alicia Marshall. If you're wondering who are we to be analyzing these pros, Cassie and I have extensive training and experience in both partnered and solo dancing. Cassie has about 22 years. I have about 24. And tonight we are talking about Telemarks. We have two videos that we're going to talk about. We're going to put the first video in the chat and then analyze that one. And then we're going to do the second one afterwards.
Yep. All right. First video in the chat of Jordan Frisbee and Jessica McCabe, formerly Cox. Yes, mine is done as well. So what is a telemark? Let's start there. At its base level, a telemark is a side pass where first the follow passes the leader and then the leader takes their momentum and then passes the follower. So it's pass plus a pass. And normally that happens starting with an inside roll, trading into closed position for the leader to pass the follow. There are a lot of details that go into making a telemark work effectively, but one of the things that I'm probably going to harp on a lot tonight is how important the follow's persistence of momentum and rotation is to a telemark working correctly. Because while it is technically possible for a leader to 100% of their own power force a telemark into existence, that's way too much work and no leader wants to do that. Like, I am very strong. I can make it happen if I want to, but I don't want to do it that way. Also, fun story. We analyzed this same dance on, I think, our second episode ever for a different topic. So in the replay, I'll link to that above. And we're also covering that either this month or next month in our Patreon, because we're going into depth about floating anchors. So if you want to hear about floating anchors, check out our Patreon. So as always, if you have any questions while we're going, feel free to unmute yourself or just drop them in the chat. To the screen share. This first telemark we're looking at starts in closed position and actually finishes in closed position. It's really tight and has momentum. And by tightness, I mean it exists on a single long slot as opposed to shifting slots from side to side. Jordan uses the telemark to prep for an accelerated send out. So that's what we're looking at going into this one. So as you can see, they are in closed position. Jordan is using the closed position arm to prep and lead an inside free spin. But he maintains connection across her waist. And then this is the key moment in a telemark, which we will be spending so much time on tonight, but I'm going to go through the whole pattern first before we get too detailed. But Jordan passes Jessica. And at this point in time, the telemark part of the pattern is over, but he's using the energy that the telemark created to create a lot of stretch and to release that stretch into an accelerated send out. So that's the context of what we're working with for this first telemark. And this first thing I want you to pay attention to, we're going to go through the whole thing again. I want you to notice how they stay on one slot very clearly.
Aaron said, for my sanity, what does a telemark mean?
A telemark is a extended side pass, essentially, one where the follow first passes the leader, but then the leader kind of grabs on, hangs on for their life, and then passes the follow in closed position. So the follow passes the leader, and then the leader takes the follow's energy and passes the follow. For this one, we are paying attention to how they are dancing on one slot. So if you pay attention to Jessica's footwork, you can see how she's very much owning the slot at this point in time. And then here is where the magic of a telemark happens. The leader takes the follow's energy and shifts the follow off of the slot. So that way the leader can then walk down the slot. So you can see where Jordan is the same slot that Jessica had been on previously. Not all telemarks are that tight. However, that is the foundation of a telemark. So we will actually see one in the next video tonight of one that's looser and one that actually shifts slots laterally across the floor through the pattern. But when you're learning how to dance a telemark, you want to understand the fundamentals that make a tight single slot telemark possible, because it's that technique that allows you to bend the rules if you so choose to do different and varying and interesting things with your telemarks.
Mm-hmm. Aaron said, so it's like a she go, then he go. Yes.
Yes. And physics wise, I kind of think of it like the West Coast swing version of a Newton's cradle. And for those of you who maybe aren't familiar with the name Newton's cradle, it's that desk toy with the steel balls hanging from wires. And if you pull the ball out from one side and let it go and it clicks, if you just pull one, that kinetic energy transfers through all of the balls and then actually moves the ball on the other end. So it's a way of really quickly redirecting and almost transmuting the follow's momentum into the leader's momentum. And that's why the follow's persistent of movement is so important.
Actually wanted to add in something.
Please do.
So we're talking about this, and the reason that we have, like, we're emphasizing the importance of this. However, this is something you want to know if you're going to do spotlights. In terms of general social dancing, you can use it, but it's not something that you'll necessarily use as much, depending on, how many people are on the floor, how much room you have, whatnot.
Yep.
It's a good thing to use to travel.
The next thing we're going to pay attention to in this one in particular is that the actual closed position part of the telemark is not your basic telemark connection. And I just want to highlight it for a second so that way you can notice the difference when we see one that's more foundationally basic in the connection. You can see how Jordan is very much connecting with Jessica's waist a lot, not only in this pattern, but throughout a lot of this dance. And what that means is she's actually running laterally into his hand here. And that is the energy he's using to start redirecting her off the slot. Normally, you want to be aiming actually for the follows back as if it were a standard closed connection hold. I don't recommend connecting with a follow's waist unless you are very, very familiar with dancing with them and they have told you it's okay to do that. I know personally, because I'm so tall and there's so much distance between my ribs and my pelvis, that connecting with my waist bruises my organs, and it also makes it a lot harder for me to engage my abdominals to protect my spine so I don't get stopped here and then my spine goes bleep. So long story short, don't connect with a follow's waist unless you have their explicit consent. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. I think the last thing I want to talk about is how Jordan is translating the energy of a telemark, which we will definitely talk about more later tonight, but how he's translating that momentum into this prep right here. So you can see how close they are at this point. But then it's not that Jessica moves, it's that he's moving to create distance between them. And he's loading the tension rubber band in his own right arm. So if you've heard us talk about center counterpoint before and how often in close position the leader's right elbow is the center counterpoint, definitely go back and watch our previous episodes on that topic because that's really important here. But that's the technique he's using to create a lot of tension along his right arm that can then be released when he drops his weight onto this foot. And that's what accelerates Jessica. That's one of the things that makes Jordan's accelerations so satisfying and powerful, is that he's loading up the prep for that energy. So that way the acceleration that happens is a resolution of the prep, as opposed to him trying to add energy into the acceleration while it's happening, because that can feel very uncomfortable and can be very dangerous for a follow. The fact that he is loading up the energy here, and then just releasing a stretched rubber band, essentially. That's what's accelerating Jessica through this turn.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to add in that if you go back to like the very end right there, you can see for Jessica, she's really helping out by sitting back and anchoring. If she doesn't do that, it's hard for him to create anything out of it.
Yeah, if she were driving her weight and we're standing over this left foot already, all of that energy would be gone. And that's a continuation of the technique that is allowing the telemark to happen in the first place.
Yeah, she's allowing him to move her, which is a really important piece of telemarks in general. Because otherwise you, as a follow, you'll get too far in front of like the connection point and you can't accelerate as easily. And it also, you end up following at kind of a different time almost. So it's really important to hang back, especially in patterns like this.
Right. So this next example of a telemark, unlike the last one where it started in closed position and ended in closed position to then go into a send out, this one starts in closed but ends in open. And it has, again, really tight footwork. So it's on a single slot and momentum, which leads into some great leader styling for Jordan. But the basic elements of a telemark are there. So he's leading an inside roll, just starting from closed position. Again, he's grabbing onto her waist, but this time it gets more around her back. And he's using her momentum to then pass her. And then instead of staying in closed position, he leads himself for a turn and they finish in open position. All right, so I think this one has a better example of the footwork because it is an older video and I wanted to make sure you guys can see what's happening with the feet. The moment when you want to use a follow's momentum to get them across the slot and out of your way as a leader, so you can then pass them and take over the slot, you want to have the follows back by count 3, count 1, count 2, count 3, no, it's 4. So you want the back by the 3 and then it's count 4 where the follow comes off the slot. So if you watch Jessica's right foot, it very subtly went to the rail on the edge of the slot. And you can see how Jordan has stepped his left foot right up against Jessica's left foot. So that way there is room to the left of his left foot for her foot to end up if she had rotated closer to him in any way. This is the part where a lot of telemarks go to die. Because it's actually really interesting because I've now been dancing West Coast Swing for, almost 16 years. No, 15. And I really loved leading telemarks when I first started leading. But then there came a time a few years down the road where follows ceased to be able to follow telemarks in my local area. And I had to do all of the work to make them happen. And I became so tired of having to do that, I kind of just let the pattern die in my repertoire. And it wasn't something I led very often. And it is because in this moment, follows would stop their momentum. So this side of their body would no longer be progressing down the slot. And that's what kills it. Imagine if in this moment, Jessica were to just randomly stop moving and it was 100% up to Jordan to manhandle her and force her to keep turning to her left at least 180 degrees while getting her out of the way and tripling past her. That's exhausting. Now, so this is the kind of Newton's cradle moment. If we think bird's eye view. Okay, so bird's eye view. We've got Jessica over here at the beginning of the pattern. We've got head and shoulders. That's what I'm drawing here. She preps on count 2. She's prepped to her right a little bit, and then she starts turning to her left. For the frame that we have frozen right now, she's basically done a 180. So right here, she's facing this direction on count 2. But then on count 4, she's facing this direction because she's done a 180, right? In this direction. Jordan, I'm going to pull out another color. This is getting complicated.
There's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on. Jordan is attached to this side of her body with his right hand, right? He is dependent on that side of her body continuing the rotation, because that side of her body, as you can see, is in the way on the slot. He cannot move through a solid object. That's not a thing. So at this point in time, after count 4, the follow essentially becomes a swinging door where this side of their body keeps rotating and gets out of the way. Where's the lovely green so I can do Jess again. All right. So that way they are over here facing that way. Let's get another color out. I'm having way too much fun. I hope this makes sense. But here, I'm going to draw the boundaries of the slot now. Oh, that's a little too far away. I'm going to do right here. So this is the slot from a bird's eye view. And often what happens is a follow doesn't actually get all the way out of the slot to be over here because they kill their own momentum. And while it is possible for a leader to force them onto the rail, it's difficult and it's a lot of work, and it could potentially hurt one or both partners. So when you are turning as a follow, I'll get yet another color here. So usually as a follow, you're going 1, 2, turn, turn, and then out. And what happens is a leader catches you around here. And if you then stop turning, you end up being this big roadblock in the middle of the slot that the leader then often has to triple around. And we're actually going to see an example of that in the next video we're going to analyze, where there's a looser telemark. It still qualifies as a telemark, but it's not happening on one long slot. So yeah, it's all about what happens right after count 4. A follow needs to continue their rotational momentum and get their left side of their body swinging open like a door, so that way they end up on the rail and the leader can triple straight down the slot past them. But hopefully that makes sense.
I mean, I thought it did.
You thought it did? Okay, cool. I can't see the chat. Peanut Gallery. Did that make any sense? I'm going to take a sip of water.
I kind of want to add in that as a follow, really, if you are using your weight in the correct way, it's a pretty natural feeling to continue the way that you're supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, if you are either too light on your feet in the wrong spot or not, or too anchored, too heavy, that's when problems appear and you won't follow it naturally.
Mm-hmm. And the last thing I want to highlight is how Jordan is favoring Jessica completely through this turn. So she's able to still have a slight bend in her arm while it goes over his head. This next version is another starting in closed position, finishing in open, very tight on a single slot. However, we can now see it from the other side of the partnership than the previous example. So we'll be able to see that count 4 a little bit easier. So we've got 2, 3, and then here's count 4. So you can see count 4, Jess is facing the end of the slot where she came from. And now you're going to see her left side, which is the side that's away from us, continue to come towards us. And then this is one of the most satisfying struts in West Coast Swing I've ever seen. But
I know.
I'll just let that live. This is one of those floating anchors we're going to be talking about on our Patreon this month.
Yeah.
So go check that out. Back to the Telemark. So once again, you will notice that Jordan's left foot was very much stepping down the slot and into the center of the slot. So it's very close to her left foot, very similar to the last example we saw. And because Jess is continuing her momentum, they are able to occupy the slot together at this point in time. And Jordan can be stepping straight down the slot with his right foot. Because Jess has gotten the left side of her body out of the way, she's now on the rail. And if you pay attention again, just to the floorboards, you can see how they are sharing the slot, and it's just one long slot instead of it shifting towards us, the audience, or away from us. This is where, like, personally, and this is like an opinion thing, I prefer both as a leader and as a follower to have the leader's right hand on the follower's shoulder blade, because that just feels sturdier and safer to me. And it also allows the leader to take more advantage of the follow's momentum because they're continuing to get that left side out of the way. You can literally grab on and just ride the energy. It feels great. You can do almost a legit actual defying physics moonwalk because you're not 100% under your own power. You're using the follow. But he's still able to basically attach his right side to Jess's left side. So that way he's rotating with her. And he does something that's really sneaky. And I know this is something Jordan does a lot, but he's using his head weight to help with that momentum. So he's very sharply looking to his left over his shoulder as he's initiating turning past her. So right here, you can see he's turning his head to the left, and his head is turning just a little bit faster than his body's turning. And just that slight change in head weight can add a lot to your own personal momentum.
So I just wanted to point out two things. One is how close together Jess has her feet here and how large a step Jordan is taking to get around her. Both of those are super important pieces.
Yep. Depending on what kind of energy you want to give your leader, you kind of have two choices in the moment right after count 4, where you're continuing to turn as a follow. You can either make your spine your axis. So bird's eye view, there's your head. And both sides of the body go around the head equally. So you're not actually traveling anywhere. Or you can make your right side the axis and swing open like a door, which actually ends up, I wish I had drawn these to scale. I somehow made them look the exact same size. In real life, this is bigger than this. So this second one down on the bottom would actually have a lot more linear energy.
Yeah.
That would give the leader so much more power. You can like fling them off of you. Funny story. It's a really fun way for me to teach leaders how to be grounded because I am so much larger than most leaders. If I choose B, They usually squeal out the other end. It's great. But if I choose A, it ends up being much tighter. So as a follow, it's up to you to pay attention to what the leader is asking for, because usually how they are leading you through this moment, guiding you, is implying one over the other, either A or B. And just being able to sense that, or if you know the person really well and the music is just telling you to do one over the other, as a follow, you also have some agency, depending on the circumstances, of which one you do, A or B. Do you have thoughts on that, Alicia?
No.
Okay.
No extra thoughts.
Cool. Can you tell I've thought about this a lot?
Yeah, that's why I'm letting you do the majority of the talking.
Cool. Yeah, Telemarks. I miss Telemarks. I love following. I love following them too. I remember once I was in a workshop with Ben and Jen DeLuca, I believe. And or was he by himself? Maybe he was by himself. That's why he needed me. He needed a follow to demo something with him. And then I come out, I do the Telemark, and I'm much larger than Ben. So I don't really have to do much to get the wee part for the lead out the other end of a Telemark. He was so excited. I got a double high five out the other end. It's like, that felt awesome. So this is Michael Kilbasa and Melissa Roots from Swing Diego, I believe 2012. And yeah, go ahead and watch the whole thing. Have a blast, because it's fun. When you get back, you'll get to analyzing.
Mine's done.
All right. Mine's okay. I just saw the giant pelvic thrust. Okay.
Yep. That's how I know it's over.
Yeah, that slap of the floor, because not only is the slap itself aggressive, but like he does such a good job of prepping it.
I know.
In a big way. So good. And then when Melissa just kind of stops with her foot on his thigh after that one foot had spin, and it's like a prolonged stop, and you're like, what?
Yep.
What's
happening?
You know, the whole room is just like, what? And then she kicks him to the floor, and it's one of my favorite moments ever.
I love how much she played along with all of it too.
You know, it was so good. And that's a really, just as a side note, a really interesting song to dance West Coast swing to, because the phrasing it varies so much, and you have a lot of that kind of like, you're almost going to be somewhere where there's more music to dance to. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, we're in the commercial break portion of this song. What swing content can one apply to this commercial break? We'll just dance around each other for a while.
Yep.
There's a triple. Also, when they like kind of dip each other at the end, Phoenix and I did that to each other once, except without the lunge bracing with our back feet. Our free feet were counterbalancing us out in front, and we got stuck matrixing together and literally needed someone to help us out. We were just stuck with our heads like 2 inches from the floor, and we turned and looked at each other like, Of all the things I've done at West Coast Swing, I think that's the one that I really wish was on tape, but it's not. All right. Anyways. All right. So we got 2 telemarks from this dance to look at to the screen share. Okay, so this first one starts in closed, ends in closed, but this is the looser example where the slot actually shifts a little bit because of how the connection is working. So I'm not saying that this is like wrong, because Michael and Melissa have earned the right to break the rules.
Yep.
However, it's not functionally a very good telemark. So satisfying side to side hip action. I just wanted you all to see context for the prep. All right, so we've got inside turn. Oh, that's what happened. Her arm was in the way. So you can see how Michael was totally going for Melissa's waist, like Jordan was with Jessica in the previous video. But because her arm was there, he couldn't very well like remove her arm You know, that's ow. So he had to wait to be safe to get her back. So he doesn't have access to her back to connect to her until it's already count 4, which makes it much harder to communicate telemark to your follow because of the way their momentum is already starting to resolve. And it's harder to redirect a follow because what's happening is normally a follow is heading straight down the slot with all of their momentum. But in a telemark, the leader around here intercepts that and is like, no, I want this momentum to go that way. And if the leader doesn't have this happen at the right point in time relative to the follow's weight transfers, it's not going to work quite right. So instead, he like holds on to her, invites her to stop traveling, and you can see how he's taking a big lateral step to triple past her. She never got off the slot. He had to cross to the other rail. And now, because of where he is, there's a new slot that he's leading her down. So it shifted a half to a full slot towards us in the camera.
This is something that like works out fine because of who they are and the skill that they have, like the skill level that they're at. If this were to happen at a lower level, it would not end up the same way.
Right. And you might get docked for doing the exact same thing at a lower level.
Yeah.
Because you basically haven't proved that you know you're breaking the rules when you're breaking the rules. It can be frustrating, but that's just kind of how it goes. If this were to happen to a leader at a lower level in a spotlight and you're going for a telemark, but you run into the follow's arm instead of their back, I would probably just let it resolve right here instead of reaching for the back, keeping your leader's right arm closer to you and letting the follow just finish a turn into open position. Just make it a standard 6 count pattern. That's the choice I would make.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like if things don't go right at higher levels, generally the dancers can turn it into something cool. Or, you know, something that they're not both dying. Right. At lower levels, that's something where you want to stop, reset.
Yeah.
It's just safer for everyone.
Yeah. And one of the things that Michael does to further, it's kind of like that improv rule. You always say yes, and you always want to agree to what's happening and then add to it, as opposed to being like, shake the Etch-a-Sketch. That didn't happen. So what he does is he notices it's a pattern that is going to start strafing like diagonally across the floor. And he doesn't fight it. So right here, he does kind of like put his foot like back on the original slot, but then he's like, yeah, it's too much work. So he notices this kind of rotational energy that they have, and he just lets it continue. And so you get this kind of pseudo telemark pivot hybrid. That's what we'll call it. Into a dip. Yeah. And that comes from the telemark. At least this is what I'm reading from the situation. Obviously, Michael might have a different perspective on what happened, but I believe that this is a result of the telemark not quite working as originally intended.
Yeah.
As a follow with very long arms, I hate how often I get into situations where I'm like, oh, you didn't want my arm there, did you? Because for me, if I want my arms up, for me to not murder anyone, I have to like really get them up. Like I have to have hustle levels of commitment to my arm styling, and I just don't want to do that all the time.
That does paint a picture.
Whenever whenever I'm dancing with a leader taller than me and he leads me for a free spin and my arms have to go north, I'm just like judo chop north, because I'm like, wow, this is a leader I could actually murder with my elbow. Usually my elbow clears the leader's head. And so I'm just like, just shoot my arms up into the air so violently. Timing be damned. I'm like, I will not kill anyone today. No, sir. All right. I clearly woke up this morning and chose comedy.
Apparently.
All right, last one. So this is a tighter example, and it's from open to open, and it has very little slot change because the technique is a little bit more solid. So you can see Michael is able to get his arm across her back and to start guiding her across the slot. So he's already intercepted her count 4. So her 4 lands on the rail of the slot. And then Melissa keeps rotating, and Michael's able to take a very large sidestep straight down the slot while Melissa takes a small step. And then he does the same turnstiling that we saw Jordan do in the last video, but he ends up maintaining that connection to continue the pattern in a unique way. I just called this open because I'm like, what else? What else do you call this?
I mean, it's not closed, so
exactly.
That's the other option.
I mean, if Melissa were leading, it would be closed, but she's not. So splitting hairs.
Aaron said ajar.
So I want you to be able to notice, because in this particular instance, because they're not in all black and there's more light and general in the background, it's easier to see. The way Michael's momentum goes from his left foot to his right foot, he is taking a really large step, and it's only sort of a delayed weight transfer. What's happening is he's actually hanging back to ride Melissa's momentum. So he's sending his right foot out in front of him. His intention is away because of all of the power that energy is giving him. If he were not countering it at all, he would be yeeted off stage. And that's where the joke I was making earlier, how it can feel like an actual moonwalk where you're breaking physics. It's because the follow is doing so much of the work for you by continuing their momentum that you're literally tethering yourself to it and being flung down the slot. It's really fun. Learn how to do it, everybody. Highly recommend. Maybe we'll call this the open chicken. All right, and just because we're here. Wha-bam! Yeah. See, Phoenix and I did not have the luxury of having our free foot out in behind. They were out here counterbalancing, and our bodies were matrixing.
I can just picture that.
Yeah. We were quite stuck. It was a good time. All right. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about on either of those two examples?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right. So that was a rather intense, diagrammatic, I'm not going to say introduction because that's not what that was, discussion, analysis of one of my favorite patterns, the Telemark.
Yeah.
I know if you guys don't have more questions, I don't believe you. So ask away while I sip some water and try to forget all the bad jokes I made.
What are we talking about next week? We're talking about
shots.
Yes.
Basically another example of me getting mad at people not momentum being right. Momentuming? Yes,
Momentum.
it's the word now. How to not be tested as a tiny lead. Yes. So actually, being tiny for a telemark, I can imagine it's really fun if you know what you're doing, because you can really lean back and pitch away from the momentum and do almost like a forward heel slide through that ending. Oh, how to not be yeeted. Yeah. Okay. Same answer though. But I mean, you'll probably enjoy me teaching you how to telemark without dying. So that's one of those that's really helpful, to actually learn how to lead it with a follow who knows what they're doing enough to give you more energy than is standard. So you can get used to it with too much. And then when it's normal, you're like, oh, that's
it.
that's it. Cool. Yeah. But it was just so interesting to me how a few years into my West Coast Swing career, the follows locally just stopped having that persistence of momentum through their turns, and telemarks just became unenjoyable to lead. So I stopped leading them all the time. And then I kind of just let them stay dead unless I was with very, very specific people. I'm interested to continue experimenting post-plague.
Post-plague.
I'm good with the words tonight.
Yep, it's going really well.
Did that make sense, Erin? It's practicing that counterbalance. Alicia, what would you say is that the element that follows need to have in their technique to continue their momentum?
Yeah, it's really about being able to control your body flight, is my opinion on that. I think that if you are aware of when you are grounding yourself and when you are thinking more, up and letting yourself be movable, if you have control of that, then you're going to have a much better time as a follow, and you're going to help your lead out a lot with that. Because if you are grounded the whole time, your lead's going to have a really hard time doing anything with it. However, on the opposite end of that, if you aren't grounding at all, once again, your lead's going to have a really hard time with that, but for like a different reason entirely.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing for them to work off of. So you have to really be careful about like knowing when you need to really set into the ground and when you need to come up and allow yourself to be movable. Because especially at the ending, like when you're opening back up, it's a pretty natural movement if you are allowing yourself to be pretty movable at that moment. Like you just kind of follow through with it. It's not like you don't have to think really hard about it. But if you are at a point where you're like just really grounded, you're not gonna, it's gonna feel really weird to finish it that way, is my opinion. So I think that's really the main thing. And the other thing is to focus on what your feet are doing. If you have your feet just kind of like, some distance apart for the whole time, it's going to be harder. You need to focus on like making sure that you do come to a point where your feet are closer together. So you rotate around that same spot and you're not moving it. It makes it hard. So
yeah, that makes me think of another thing is the more advanced a dancer you become, the more discrete like steps on the to-do list you have for turns that travel. Kind of when you're learning, you're kind of like Barbie, where you're just one piece, you're kind of flailing yourself down the slot and you're just one piece that's kind of going ring, ring, ring. But as you become more advanced, there's actually discrete actions in between the weight transfers and how you resolve a weight transfer and initiate the next one with rotation. And if you're just kind of flinging yourself into turns and there's no discrete action to your individual weight transfers through them, you're not going to be able to continue that momentum properly and ground at the right moment for the leader. you'll just kind of randomly stop when their hand is on your back, as opposed to being like, oh, they need me to open the door for them.
Yep.
And if you don't have the skill to be like, oh, they need me to open the door for them, and I can do it, I'll do that now. If you don't have that skill, it just kind of dies. And then the leader has to end up tripling around you. And depending on how good they are, they might be able to like actually come back around to the slot, kind of like Michael was trying to do in the video, or they'll just move the slot because that's just the easiest thing to do.
So the other thing I wanted to add just for follows is that if you aren't grounding at all, you're going to feel like you're being thrown around really aggressively. Like, because of that momentum that going into that telemark creates, if you aren't grounded, you're going to get thrown around.
Yeah.
And it becomes really uncomfortable because you'll get kind of really off balance. And you don't want that. You want to be under your power the whole time. You want to, as a follow, choose when to be grounded and when to allow your lead to move you. And that's just in general. As a follow, you need to be under control, of your body the whole time. You need to choose when to allow your lead to move you.
Right.
Separate now, but
yeah. And that makes me think, because kind of functionally what's happening from count 4 on in a telemark is functionally the follow is becoming the leader, in the way you're having to counterbalance and time your counterbalancing to allow the leader to travel past you. And I think that's what can also feel jarring, is because you think you're still in the follow role at that point in time, but functionally you're not. You are essentially leading a send out at that point in time, but you're a follow. Maybe that will make more sense to some people. Or if you're a follow, whoever leads it all, it feels very similar to the second half of a whip. Just instead of sending your leader past you on the right, you're doing it on the left. That's the only difference. But it has that same, you want to send your partner past you by opening the door, but it's just to your back to your left on the telemark. But once you kind of get the nuance of how to get out of the way and then ground yourself and then counterbalance the leader properly, it feels so good.
It does.
I love
it's really
them.
Fun. It's a really
I
fun
want to
pattern.
dance more of them. Please study this episode until we can all dance telemarks until the wee hours of the morning together. Post plague.
Karen said that that's why telemarks feel weird. It feels sometimes that I didn't have anything to play off of. Yeah, a lot of times if you as a lead aren't feeling like the telemark is going correctly, it might not be you. It might be the follow in the way that they're doing it.
Yeah. Ooh, another small detail that we didn't get to talk about because both of the examples we're looking at tonight, both Michael and Jordan put their whole forearms across the follow's back, kind of around their waist.
Yeah.
That's not personally how I lead them. I tend to stay more to the left side of the follow's back and not cross the spine. But what can happen is if you have a tendency to have like a lifted ballroom elbow at all in your closed position, that is going to round out the momentum of a telemark in a way that dissipates it, and it can also kill it. So you want to make sure that your right elbow as a leader is dropped and pointed to the floor. And that will help translate the energy from your hand, which is attached to the follow's back, all the way into your body. It shortens the chain because your wrist, where's my camera? Because your wrist is closer to your shoulder because your upper arm has essentially become a part of your torso. Whereas if your arm is up and around and you've got this big rounded shape, that energy actually has to go around that curve to get to your body. So it slows it down and it reduces momentum. So keeping your elbow tucked as a leader, in general, that's just something I recommend in closed position for everyone. Yeah. But if you know you have a tendency to raise your elbow, raising your elbow will make telemarks so much harder.
Speaking of that arm wrapping around, so for follows, that's one thing that will really pull you out of an anchor and make you feel like you're getting thrown around is when that arm goes around the waist and pulls in a lot of times, because it will kind of break like almost in half, right? Because you have just part of you going forward. So that just kind of breaks the ability to really anchor well. So if you're not like already anchored, you're just going to get thrown, and you're going to have your momentum like forward from the middle of your body, which is a really weird feeling.
Yeah. My spine is so sensitive that if a leader ever puts pressure in any sort of closed position, like a whip or a telemark, and they're putting their hand across the center of my spine to connect, I purposefully completely disengage from that situation. I'll like go through the motions, but they will not have any counterbalance into their
Right.
hand on my back, because that will risk my health and safety. And it's funny because like it happens to me a lot, because I don't know, leaders, I don't necessarily do the math in their head, like, oh, her shoulder blade would be farther away because she's taller. I don't know. They just put their hand where it normally is for other follows, and then that equals certain doom for me if I don't dance defensively. And what'll happen is like they'll want lots of energy from me because they know I can provide that. But then if they do that, I'm like, I'm not going to risk injury. So I completely dissipate it all. And they look so grumpy and mad at me out the other end. And I'm like, that's not my fault, sir. And they'll like do it again and again and again. And I'm like, maybe ask me what's wrong, because it's not socially acceptable for me to tell you what's wrong without you asking. So
Yeah. That reaction is one of my least favorite things, is when you don't do something that your lead thinks that they're leading you into, and then they just keep doing it. One of my least favorite things. If you do it once, maybe you can try it one more time if you think you know what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Past that, don't do it again.
Yeah. If you just think the follow didn't follow you correctly, don't lead it again.
Yeah. Don't do that.
Yeah. It was so funny. I was
styling.
I was dancing with KP once, and it was early, and he and I hadn't danced together too much. So he wasn't quite aware with how effective and fast I could be when energy is applied to the system. I don't think he was ready. And I wasn't ready for how much energy he was asking me to apply to the system. So like we almost died. And it was one of those we were both at fault kind of situations. But he's such the gentleman. He's like, no, it's my fault. He's very adamant about it. I'm like, I mean, we both contributed to that. We could kill people. Energy, momentum. It's fun.
It is when you know how to work with it.
Exactly. All right. Any other questions, comments, concerns, or bad jokes? I haven't asked for those in a while.
Haven't you? I haven't noticed.
Yeah, we will be talking about slingshots next week, because that's another pattern with very specific momentum and energy exchange and redirection that most people lead in a flaily way, and I want to fix that. So
a flaily way.
I mean, that's the only way to describe it, right?
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Like, thou shalt be over here now, and the follow's like, ah.
Usually I just take the momentum and nope out of it somehow.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Generally my lead's like, oh, that was really cool. I was like, yeah, I just follow through with that the way you wanted me to do it.
Yeah. But you chose poorly, so I chose to choose wisely. All right, cool. Thank you all so much for joining us. We'll be back next week. Miles will be here on June 24th. May the force be with you.
Yeah. Sure. That seems like an appropriate way to end.
Hello and welcome to another zany episode of Nerdy West Coast Swing. Wait, what is our intro? I am a cave troll today. 1 second. Okay, anchors are out of this world, the points don't matter. Okay, cool.
You looked very concerned when you did that.
I did? Do I need to do it again? We'll do it again. To the screen share! I had to get the giggle in there for it to be on brand. I'm not going to delete that because I I need evidence of this horrendous thing I have made. Don't get mesmerized by the strut. Don't get mesmerized by the strut. Then I'm going to double check something because I'm not sure I want to talk about it now because Jordan is in all black. The background is all black. Jessica's in all black. It just makes it hard to see certain things.
The problem that we have most weeks.
I know, right? If we ever become cool enough to slightly change champion clothing aesthetic for Jack and Jill's, we'll know we have arrived.